Well, my body lies over the ocean. My body lies over the sea. Ooh, my body lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my body to me. Bring back, oh, bring back my...
I'm excited to welcome Scott Arizala back to the Scott Arizala Show. Hey Scott, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me again, Travis. Super excited about today's episode. We were going to talk a little bit about clear expectations and what that means. This falls into our communication series on different ideas and topics. And, you know, when it comes to clear expectations, a lot of times what I'm thinking about is how we help teach our young people, our campers and our participants about the processes and procedures that happen at camp, because, you know, camp is really a different place than I think any kids really ever have been. I mean, in fact, if you really think about just what we do to kids on opening day at a lot of overnight camps, I mean, it really is, it's phenomenal, like the different level of experience they have. I mean, you know, a simple example is like, you know, you come into camp on opening day at a typical overnight camp, and the very first thing that happens is your stuff is separated from you, and you're told to go to the dining hall or wherever to check in, and that your stuff will like sort of magically get to wherever it's supposed to be, and then you gotta go through this gauntlet of check-in process, and you end up in this cabin somewhere out in the woods, and that's where you're gonna live for the next, you know, 2 weeks or 8 weeks or however long. All along the way, meeting these adults that are like so excited and pumped to see you, but they don't even know your name. I mean, it's just, the way we do things is so different at camp that I think it's really important to talk about how can we be as clear as possible with our expectations. You know, one of the things that I used to do is I used to teach archery when I was a counselor at my camp growing up, and one of the things we have to do obviously is all the safety and line commands when we teach archery. And one of the things that I noticed right away is that I don't care how many times I had the rules and line commands posted, I don't care how many times I talked through them, there was always some kid who like didn't know that he wasn't supposed to run down range while other kids were shooting, or just like something so obvious and ridiculous. So one of the things that I would do to try and be really as clear as possible is we would teach them all the line commands, and then I would have them in groups of 2 or 3 direct me and some of the other staff members through shooting, like through what the line commands were. And I would actually role model for them all the not great ways of doing the line command. So it was like approach the ready line or approach the shooting line, and I would, you know, approach it backwards, or I'd go up sideways, or I'd sort of crawl on all fours to get there, and I'd have kids be able to visualize and tell me, no, that's not right, we meant walk up to it, and da-da-da-da. So just another way, or a good example of how clarity doesn't always mean just like saying it again or saying it louder, which is how a lot of adults do it. You know, clarity in your expectations and what you're talking about is trying to sort of work with the perspective of the campers, work with the perspective of your participants, and try to sort of meet them where they are on their level of understanding. And I think this is so important. I think we can keep it focused on what our campers sort of know and do, but obviously it's something that, you know, we need to think about as camp professionals and working with our young staff as well.
Well, what are the best ways for us to then develop a system for communicating with, obviously with campers, but with staff as well as camp directors?
Sure. I mean, I think the best techniques that you can employ when developing really clear expectations is just straight up to ask a lot of questions. You know, one of the things that I do all the time when I was, particularly with kids, but this also works with adults, works with anybody, is I'll get into a situation, we're at arts and crafts, we're at a training session with adults, and I'll say, all right, folks, you know, what are we going to do today? What do you think this is all about? And, you know, at arts and crafts, or at sports and rec, or at a training session, everybody has some sort of idea about what's going on, right? Like, if it's a training session with a bunch of adults, they've seen on the list, oh, it's behavior management with Scott or whatever. I have almost never been in a situation where adults or kids have said, we have no idea, we were just told to come here and some guy would be here to talk to us. Every once in a while I'll get to a camp and that's kind of the setup as far as what the director said. You know, we don't know, it was just some mandatory staff training we were supposed to show up to, which is always like, you know, great, thanks for, you know, good, thanks for setting me up proper, you know. Other than that, you know, almost everybody knows sort of what's going on, unless it's like intentionally a secret activity, which of course is fun on it and interesting on a whole different level, but 99% of the time they know what's going on, so you ask them questions, and then you can start to understand where they're at, right? So it's arts and crafts with a bunch of kids, and they start saying things like, it's arts and crafts, we're going to glue stuff, we're going to paint stuff, we're going to do a project. Maybe they know that it's tie-dye day, so we're going to do tie-dyes, whatever, and you can start have this conversation. That's a real different approach than, all right, folks, this morning is tie-dye, blah, 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 blah. You know, I think a really great way to be clear with what we're going to be doing is to just ask the questions. Another technique that I employ all the time is, you know, part of being together in a group, there are typically rules, right? At arts and crafts, there could be safety rules. At, you know, sports and rec, there could be sort of boundaries where we're playing this game, we can't go past the hill or, you know, past the tree line or whatever. At waterfront, there might be safety rules like you can only go on the dock with a life jacket, you know, so on and so forth. In a training session, there are even rules, right? Like, don't answer your phone in the middle of the training session or fall asleep or, you know, those kinds of things. It's tempting as the facilitator and leader and teacher to just go ahead and say, hey, we're at Arts and Crafts, we're going to be doing pottery, do not touch the kiln, actually don't pass this red line, that is where the kiln is, because that's a safety rule. Are there any questions? Like, it's really tempting to do that, right? I think a better technique to be more clear with what your expectations is to ask a really particular question, which is, all right, folks, what should we remember about this activity? Now, I'll be real honest with you, Travis. I'm not exactly sure anybody has ever answered that question the right way whenever I've asked it, but maybe it's just because I'm stubborn, but I continually ask that question, and the reason being is, for me, I'm trying to sort of implicitly talk about the most important part of a rule, which is to remember it, right? Like, what should we remember about this activity? Like, framing it like that puts it a little, just like in a different framework in kids' heads. Okay, I am supposed to remember these things, right? And then, since they don't know how to answer that question, then I always follow it up with the next question, which everybody knows how to answer, which is, okay, so that's all the stuff that we're going to do, and you're right, and maybe you didn't get everything, so I added a few things to like this list of stuff we're going to do. What should we remember? Nobody knows how to answer, so then I always go, so what are the rules about this activity, right? Now everybody knows how to answer those questions, and so we start talking about some of those things, and then I think the best facilitators know how to boil down all those things to 2 or 3 rules. All right, very good. If we need any help, you're going to ask an adult. You stay away from the kiln. Great. Let's make some pottery or whatever it is. So those are the kinds of ideas that I think leads to ultimate clarity. It's probably interesting because if you're sort of following my line of thought, my logic, one of the things that I'm saying about being clear with your expectations is for you not necessarily to just come out and say them in simple, clear language. One of the things that I'm sort of advocating is that you spend time, extra time, sort of asking questions and talking about what the expectations are, which, you know, is exactly that. I think it's more time intensive. It might be a little harder to facilitate versus you just getting everybody quiet and sitting down and talking. But my opinion is that it pulls out, it makes them more clear. It pulls it out of everywhere. I mean, it frames it in the ideas and the words of your participants. It helps everybody understand what the expectations are. and there's less of a power struggle or dynamic there, right? It's less of me telling you what the rules are, and since I'm the adult or facilitator or teacher, you better pay attention. And it's more, hey, let's develop what these expectations are out here for this activity so that we can all have the best time. And I think those things can be more clear. And by the way, cover everything that you need them to cover.
And by covering all that stuff and making sure that they understand it, is why an important question?
Why might be the single hardest and most complicated question that I think a counselor or frontline staff member can ask, because it gets at probably like what we would all consider the most adult piece of all this, in the simplest way possible. I mean, if you are talking to a bunch of kids, you're talking to them about what you remember, and they say something like, don't go and touch the kiln, right? You can follow up with the simplest question, why or how come, and yet it gets at one of the most complicated things for kids to understand, which is consequences, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is that consequences are built on your executive thought, which for all of you out there means the front part of your brain, which by the way isn't developed until like you're 25 or something. So the reality is that almost everybody at camp doesn't have their sort of front brain, their executive thought brain fully developed. And you kind of wonder as a 35-year-old camp director, like, why does all their behavior seem bizarre? You know, well, it's because they don't always, they're, and you could be talking about your own staff or whoever. It's because they haven't quite worked the part out of their brain that really understands, like, if I do this, then that'll happen, right? And so getting them to think about, in their terms and their ideas around why something would happen, well, one, helps develop their brain, but two, will help you sort of understand their perspective on consequences. And the fact of the matter is it's more powerful for everybody, all the other kids in the room, to hear one kid say, well, yeah, it's like not safe and you're going to burn your face off if you go anywhere near the kiln, right? Like that is like a kid way of saying it versus the adult way of saying it, which is like, well, it's really unsafe, the kiln is at 500 and whatever degrees and blah, blah, blah. And they understand all those words. I'm not saying dumb down. I'm just saying that the framework is also important. You know, kid code is really important when it comes to this kind of stuff. All of which I think is also true for adults. You know, it's better when you know, the class or the staff can kind of use their words to sort of frame it and understand what's going on, and then you can draw that closer to, you know, what your intentions were behind that question. So yes, why, how come, incredibly key questions to ask when you're talking about what the clear expectations are.
3 Adventures International Camp Staff.
3 things you should know about 3 Adventures. 1. Our owners are all former camp directors. 2. We're a high-quality company that's easy on your budget. 3. Background checks. Our international camp staff come from all over the world, and every one of them has had a background check. No exceptions, no excuses. 3adventures.com, the site to get great camps connected with great staff.
I know that at your camp, Scott, you work with a lot of kids and some adults with different mental abilities and comprehension styles. Do you have a way for getting your expectations across that's not as verbal, or that's not only verbal?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I would say it's the same kind of techniques. It's just oftentimes done in really different ways. You know, for example, when you're working with kids or adults for that matter that are nonverbal and you're using, let's say, a picture schedule, you know, so a lot of times it can be done the same way, where a picture schedule is pretty much like, you know, you're showing pictures of different activities, and you can, you know, ask the question, right? It's like, you know, they're pointing to, let's say they're pointing to bedtime, you know, bed because it's bedtime. You could also, you know, sort of point to a toy and sort of ask the question, you know, is it time to do this? Like, you know, that, you know, that's always something that's going to come up. And if the answer is no, you take the toy off and you put it in the pouch. Those kinds of things. Or you can write down, a lot of kids who have verbal issues, right, can do a lot of writing. So you write down, questions like, or, you write down rules like, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock bedtime, and then you write why, and you get them to sort of write in, good sleep, rest for tomorrow, whatever else. I mean, there's lots of different ways, but the concept, I think, is the same. Like, well, what's supposed to be happening right now? A great example of this, of figuring out process and procedure and being clear with expectations, is in the bathroom. One of the things that we do for not only our kids with autism who might have some verbal processing issues, we actually keep these up all through the summer. So with any kids, is we actually put in the bathroom these sort of picture maps of what you're supposed to do, right? So it's literally, you're standing at the sink and you see the first picture where it's like the toothbrush and the toothpaste. The second picture is the toothpaste going on the toothbrush. The third picture is the brushing the teeth, right? And it's just a sort of a visual reminder of sort of what the expectation is when you're standing in front of the sink. It's those sorts of things that I think are really effective. But again, the principle is the same. It's about thinking about what the expectations are and then being really explicit and clear about how do we draw those out. And then it's all operating on this assumption that everybody walks into a situation and has some sort of expectation about what's going on. They might not know it, they might not be able to articulate it, they might not even be that conscious of it, but they have some sort of expectation, and the more we can draw that out, the better the sort of entire piece for everybody is going to be.
There's lots of great ways that you've said there, Scott, to make it really successful for both your kids and for your staff and for you to know that they do understand the expectations. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing about clear expectations today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be to sort of end with, which is funny because I'm going to make the point, to end with sort of on a negative note, is to say there's a bunch of stuff I don't want you to do, and one of them is to use negative language. When it comes to creating really good and clear expectations, using words like no and stop and don't are relatively ineffective because it gets, well, first of all, it gets the wrong thing in people's brains. When you're screaming out, don't run, of course, every kid on the planet, all they're really hearing is the run part of don't run. And, you sound like every other adult. The fact of the matter is that every adult screams don't run. So that's why great youth development professionals say things like walk please all the time. So, in thinking through some of these clear expectations and your rules posted at activities, or how you're having this conversation with young people when you say, hey, what should you remember and why and all this kind of stuff, see how many of those no's you can turn into no's, stops, and don'ts you can turn into positive language. There's pretty much something that everybody should be doing that you can sort of mention, because the reality is working with kids, working with adults for that matter, you're gonna have to say no and stop and don't a lot. I want that stuff to be effective. So when we're thinking through about how to make those expectations as clear as possible, let's think about avoiding as much as we can some of that negative language.
Well, Scott, thank you very much again for some great ideas and good ways of thinking about things that maybe people wouldn't have up until now. So I always appreciate your perspective on these things. For those of you who are watching, if you want more information about the things that we talk about and to find out previous episodes of this Scott Arizala show, we invite you to go to camphacker.org and click on the link to Scott's show.
Thanks, Travis. And if you guys want to find out more about what I do, check me out at thecampcounselor.com. I appreciate everyone tuning in and watching, and we'll see you next time.
Well, my body lies over the ocean. My body lies over the sea. Ooh. bunny.